The old, abandoned asylum had always fascinated me. Its grim facade stood on the outskirts of town, a decaying relic. Its reputation was infamous, known for housing the mentally disturbed, the violent, and the unexplainable. Despite countless rumors of paranormal activity, I had never believed in ghosts or spirits. That was until the Halloween night I decided to explore the forsaken asylum with my friends. My friends Mark and Emily shared my curiosity. We had heard tales of the asylum being a playground for the supernatural, a place where the veil between our world and the next was thin. Armed with flashlights and nerves of steel, we ventured into the decrepit building, determined to debunk the myths that surrounded it. The air inside was thick with the smell of mold and decay, and the silence was oppressive. We made our way through narrow hallways, the sound of our footsteps echoing like thunder in the eerie stillness. Our flashlights cast long shadows on the walls, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we explored deeper into the asylum, I began to feel a growing sense of dread. It was as though the building itself had a malevolent presence, a dark energy that clung to every decaying wall. Emily's voice trembled as she whispered, "This place gives me the creeps." Mark and I tried to reassure her, but our own apprehension was growing. We entered a large, dimly lit room, and my flashlight beam fell upon a wall covered in old patient records. Some of the names were familiar, names of people who had once lived in our town, their fates sealed within these grim walls. Suddenly the air grew colder, and our breaths misted in front of us. I shivered, not from the chill but from an overwhelming sense of dread. Something was here with us, something that shouldn't be. Emily let out a gasp, and we turned to see her staring at a shadowy figure at the far end of the room. It was a silhouette, tall and hunched, and it seemed to sway as though dancing to an otherworldly tune. Panic set in as we realized we were not alone. Mark grabbed my arm, his voice quivering. "We need to get out of here now." But as we turned to make our escape, the figure moved with unnatural speed, blocking our path. Its form was indistinct, like a swirling mass of darkness. We were trapped. My heart pounded in my chest as the figure drew closer, its presence suffocating. Emily screamed, and Mark and I pushed forward, desperate to escape the looming nightmare. But the figure moved with us, always just out of reach, taunting us. We ran through the labyrinthine hallways, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The asylum seemed to stretch on forever, a never-ending maze of terror. It was as though the building itself had come alive, its walls shifting and changing to trap us. As we reached a dead-end corridor, I turned to face the figure. It loomed before us, its shadowy form pulsating with an unnatural energy. I could hear whispered voices, like a chorus of lost souls filling the air. With trembling hands, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small crucifix that had been my grandmother's. I held it up, and the figure recoiled, letting out an unearthly wail of agony. It seemed repelled by the symbol of faith. Taking a chance, we sprinted past the figure, backtracking through the twisting corridors. The asylum seemed to fight against our escape, shifting and changing as though determined to keep us within its clutches. But we pressed on, our faith in that small crucifix, our only hope. Finally, we burst through the asylum's decaying doors and into the cool night air. Gasping for breath, we stumbled away from the building, our hearts still pounding with fear. As we caught our breath, I glanced back at the asylum, its windows dark and foreboding. The shadowy figure still lingered within, its presence like a festering wound in the heart of the old building. We never spoke of that night again, but the memory of our terrifying encounter haunted us. I had gone into the asylum a skeptic, but I emerged with a chilling certainty that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. Forces that can turn a simple game of cat and mouse into a nightmarish battle for survival. And though I may never fully comprehend what we encountered that night, I will always carry with me the knowledge that the paranormal is real, and it lurks in the darkest corners of our world, waiting to be discovered by those who dare to seek it out. My Aunt Emma told me this story when I was a kid. On Halloween night, the town of New Bedford, Massachusetts, was a tapestry of autumn colors and eerie celebrations. Children in costumes roamed the streets, trick-or-treating, while adults adorned their homes with sinister decorations. But beneath the facade of merriment, a grim and chilling presence lurked. The townspeople had dubbed him the Phantom. He was a dangerous escaped convict, a man with a twisted past and a missing ear, who had vanished into the woods years ago. His real name was all but forgotten, replaced by the legend of his brutality. As night fell, the small town's atmosphere grew tense. Parents warned their children to stay close, not to wander too far from home. The tales of the one-eared phantom had taken on a life of their own, passed down through generations. They said he only came out on Halloween night, seeking revenge against those who had wronged him. In the heart of New Bedford, a group of teenagers gathered at the town's oldest cemetery. Among them was Emma, a fearless girl with a penchant for the macabre. She was determined to prove that the legend of the Phantom was nothing more than a ghost story. Emma led the way, her flashlight cutting through the darkness as they explored the cemetery. They had nearly convinced themselves that the Phantom was nothing but a myth when they stumbled upon an old, weathered gravestone. Its inscription was barely legible, but Emma's flashlight revealed the name, Foster Green, the same name that had been associated with the one-eared phantom in the town's folklore. Excitement and dread coursed through Emma's veins as she brushed away dirt and leaves from the grave. The date of death sent a shiver down her spine, October 31st, 1886, exactly 100 years ago to the day. It was said that Foster Green had met a gruesome end, but his body had never been found. The wind howled as Emma and her friends continued to explore the cemetery. They heard the distant wail of sirens. Panic washed over them, and they realized that the police were on the hunt for the one-eared phantom, who had been sighted in the woods nearby. Ignoring the warning signs, Emma and her friends decided to venture into the woods, driven by curiosity. The air was heavy with the scent of damp leaves and fear. They followed an overgrown path deeper into the dark woods. The eerie silence was broken only by the distant sounds of sirens and their own footsteps. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she led her friends further into the unknown. Suddenly, a rustling in the underbrush sent them all into a frenzy. They froze, their flashlights trembling. From the darkness emerged a man, disheveled and haggard, with one ear missing. It was him, the one-eared phantom. Emma's friends screamed, but she stood her ground, determined to confront the legend. The phantom's eyes bore into hers, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, he lunged at her with a wild, primal fury. In the chaos that ensued, Emma's friends managed to escape, their terrified cries fading into the distance. She was left alone with the one-eared phantom, grappling with him in the moonlit woods. His strength was unnatural, and his grip was like a vice. Emma fought with all her might, clawing at his face, kicking and screaming. In a final desperate act, she reached for a nearby branch and swung it at his head. The blow landed with a thud, and the phantom collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Exhausted and trembling, Emma stumbled back to town, her clothes torn and her body battered. She found her friends, who had alerted the police, and together they led them back to the spot where they had left the unconscious convict. But the phantom was gone. The only evidence of his presence was the shattered branch lying on the ground. The police searched the woods tirelessly, but the dangerous fugitive had vanished into the night, leaving nothing but a trail of dread in his wake. The legend of the phantom persisted in New Bedford, Massachusetts, but now it was no longer just a story to scare children. My Aunt Emma and her friends had encountered the chilling reality of the escaped convict on Halloween night, and they knew that the darkness could hold unimaginable horrors, even in the most ordinary of places. In the 80s, I was a high school football player, known for my brawny frame and a knack for scoring touchdowns. Life was all about football, but this particular night, the game we played was unlike any other. Our small town was famous for its love of football, but it was also renowned for its eerie legends and ghostly tales. This Halloween, the two worlds collided in a way I'll never forget. I was getting ready for our big game that was scheduled for the next day. My teammates and I decided to spend the evening watching horror movies at my friend Jake's house. He lived in an old, creaky mansion on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that always looked like it was straight out of a horror movie. As the sun went down, we gathered around the TV in Jake's dimly lit living room. Jake, the resident horror movie aficionado, introduced us to Nightmare on Elm Street, Poltergeist, and Halloween. The atmosphere grew tense as each movie unfolded. By the time Michael Myers was chasing Jamie Lee Curtis through the dimly lit streets of Haddonfield, the house felt eerier than ever. Between movies, We traded ghost stories and passed around a joint that Jake got from his older brother Steve's stash in his bedroom above the garage. As the clock approached midnight, Jake suggested that we play a game of football. It was a tradition we upheld every Halloween, a way to shake off the eerie vibes and reassert our courage. We played under the moon's glow, throwing passes and tackling each other. The chill in the air and the glow of the moon making it feel like a scene from a teenage werewolf movie. But as the game wore on, the atmosphere grew even more peculiar. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The surrounding trees seemed to come alive with whispering shadows, and the wind carried faint, distant laughter. I shook it off, attributing it to the spooky ambiance of Halloween night. We were in the middle of a play when it happened. I had just caught a pass from Jake when I heard a scream coming from the house. Startled, we dropped the football and ran inside, only to find Jake's little sister, Aisling, trembling in the hallway. She claimed that she had seen a ghostly figure dressed in old-fashioned clothing in the hallway. We dismissed what she said, chalking it up to the scary movies we've been watching. But when we heard the floorboards creak and the faint sounds of footsteps, our bravado dwindled. We decided to investigate, slowly advancing down the dimly lit corridor. We turned the corner and came face to face with the figure Emily had described. It was dressed in a tattered old football uniform, and its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. I thought we were all feeling the effects of Steve's weed until a chill ran down my spine as I recognized the ghostly figure's face. It was our town's legendary football hero, Billy Prescott, who had mysteriously vanished in the 1960s. The stories said he died on the field and his spirit still roamed the town on Halloween night, seeking to play the game he loved. He beckoned us to follow him onto the front lawn. We couldn't resist the call, even though fear gripped our hearts. The ghostly figure lined up across from us, and as the game began, the moonlight illuminated the field. Billy Prescott moved with an otherworldly grace, his every step carrying an aura of nostalgia and sadness. We played our hearts out, racing down the field, throwing passes and making tackles. The old-timer was surprisingly fast and agile for a spirit, and his spectral teammates joined the game. It was a surreal, ghostly football game under the eerie moonlight. As the game drew to a close, Billy made a final pass and the football seemed to hang in the air for an eternity. I leaped, catching it in the end zone, and the ghostly figure gave a spectral smile before slowly fading away into the night. The chill that had gripped us earlier had transformed into a sense of awe and reverence. We realized that, for one magical Halloween night, we had played alongside a football legend, albeit one from a different era. We returned to Jake's house, leaving the eerie legends and ghostly tales behind us. That Halloween night, we experienced a game that transcended time and left us with a spine-tingling memory that would stay with us for years to come. It was a night that I would never forget, and one that I still almost can believe.